All right, I have two visitors to the CLL this afternoon. Two, one distinguished and one hoping to be distinguished gentlemen, both in the legal profession. I will simply introduce them by name and then I'll have them say some more about themselves for the audience. Our audience is a virtual audience. On my far left, I have Justice Ralston Nelson of the Caribbean Court of Justice. And on my immediate left, I have Peter Carter, young attorney who is in Alpha Chambers. Justice Nelson, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Well, as you said, I am a judge of the Caribbean Court of Justice. I come from school at Peter and I share Queen's Royal College, and we were both scholars at Queen's Royal College. I started off in modern languages. I won a scholarship in modern languages, and my first degree really was in modern languages, French and Spanish. And I did that at St. Catherine's College, Oxford. At the time, they expected me to go into international relations or something like that, but I thought I wanted to do law. And I proceeded to do law. But languages has been my great love all my life. It is, and I found that in my personal life that it has widened my horizon. It has made me made other people more accessible to me. I have enjoyed the cultures of France, the cultures of Spain and Latin America, and in that way, being able to enjoy a richer life. Not in the sense of money, but in terms of depth of experience. I think languages are very important because they're about communication. And I think when you do law, you realize that law is basically about language. It's about language, and of course a set of principles whereby society is ordered, so that it comes down every time to language. And remember that the system we have, the common law system, is not the only system in the world. It is also the civil law system. And one of the difficulties about our present training is that there is no access, because there is not sufficient language training for the civil law system. And I feel that that is an important, well, it's a great deficiency of the present system. But perhaps I should let Peter introduce himself.
Yeah, so as previously introduced, my name is Peter Carter. I'm a young attorney. Next month will be my second year of private practice. I studied at the University of Warwick, and before that, as Mr. Nelson said, at Queen's Royal College. At Warwick, I studied law. It was a particular law degree in that it was called Law with a Study Abroad in English. Though that doesn't immediately hint and show my passion and the importance that I attach to languages. My immediate group in university studying law comprised of students on the law study abroad in English program, the law French program, and the law German program. And this was something that, triggered a lot of my current sentiments and a lot of my current views of language, because a lot of my friends, my closest friends in university came out of these three programs. So just to touch a little bit on that, as I said, Warwick had a study of a law French and a law German program. And piggybacking on what Justice Nelson said, a lot of my colleagues learned the civil jurisdiction of law by studying law in Germany, studying law in France, And also when at Warwick, they were taught German and French law. And of course, this can be quite relevant to our Caribbean experience. As much as the Caribbean is dominated by the English-speaking Caribbean, there are other jurisdictions with other viewpoints. And so that's at least my legal take on languages, or at least my legal appreciation of languages. Of course, I have a personal appreciation of languages, my parents both being language teachers, and so my house from a very young age was filled with language. I remember at the time, though, language was used as a way for my parents to communicate between themselves without us knowing. And this is important. I bring this up because in the law, you want the opposite. You want open, free flow of information. And so it's important, I say, and I'll get a bit more into this later, that students embrace languages because, as Justice Nelson rightly pointed out, lawyers are the medium for many to communicate. And so English is not the only language in the world. In fact, the majority of the world speaks a different language. And so, it's one should not get too comfortable by the dominance of English culture in a global world. And law, like the world, is a global village. Everyone, every country has law. And so to be able to properly understand law as a whole, because law very often is comparative to different cultures and different countries. So to be able to understand law in its fullest context, one has to embrace languages.
Very interesting. I mean, my background is languages. I have no law except law and order in various forms. But that sensitivity you bring to how important law is to your profession is something I think that certainly is an eye-opener for me, and certainly is something that you need to underscore to the future lawyers in the law program. So I think already you have both touched on the fact that professionally, a language is something which should be a core component in a law degree. And I think this is in keeping with the thinking of the Dean of Law, who feels that her students should study a foreign language. And as you both said, there is also, of course, the personal element to learning a language in the way it enriches you, it gives you a depth and appreciation of the wider world. And Peter raised the point of the dominance of English. I say to people all the time, we English speakers are very comfortable with the notion that everyone speaks English. And you need to remind them, for starters, there are 1.3 billion Chinese. Everyone does not speak English. In fact, what the linguists know is that there is only a quarter of the world's population who speak English. And of that quarter, of course, a number of people who speak English as a first or who have a high level of proficiency. And a number of people, certainly when you have navigated Europe, you know that there are a number of people who speak English, but English is for them language 4, 5, or 6. Whereas we, comfort ourselves, well, with the Americans speak English, and the UK, they speak English. And, but even in the US now, the United States is the second largest English-speaking second largest Spanish-speaking population in the world. So even in the US, the reality of everybody speaks English is no longer true. And it's really something that we have to try to get over to young people, that you are, in the same way that Peter described that the children were left out of it when the parents spoke in French, you're really cut off from a whole lot of knowledge, a whole lot of information, a whole lot of other ways of living if you don't speak a foreign language. Perhaps, I think you have made eloquently the point of the importance in law. Perhaps you could talk a little bit now about personally your engagement with languages. Justice Nelson, you could. I had forgotten that you started off as a language scholar.
Yeah, well, that's true. It has been always there with me. What I found remarkable is that after I had completed my first degree, that I was just as comfortable in languages as I was before it. And from the personal point of view, certainly in terms of travel, in terms of getting to know the Caribbean, I have traveled extensively in Central America, and I haven't done all of South America, but some of South America. And the advantage is that I am at home, I'm comfortable in those places because I know the language. France and the French overseas territories, again, I got to know Guadeloupe and Martinique at first hand, so to speak, because I speak French. And I think that is an experience that Caribbean people need to have, because we are not the majority. We are not the majority in terms of the population-wise, in terms of language speaking. We are not, and you have to remember that the region is dominated by Spanish speakers, and it is sometimes very embarrassing to go to a conference in, say, the Dominican Republic and to find that the Caribbean people from the Commonwealth haven't got a clue as to what is going on, because they simply have no language. You see, and that has got to stop. We should be in a position where we feel we have to have a language, just like the Norwegians and the Swedes. We have to have Spanish, because we won't be able to communicate, and people are constantly in that position in the Caribbean. They go to conferences in the Caribbean and Latin America, say, it's even worse, and they're totally at sea. And the first thing I say, no hablo de Spanish, or something like that. That is ridiculous. And it seems to me that we have to break that prison whereby we feel that we have English and therefore we don't need to get out of it. We need to get out of that prison that English is. And we need also, as Peter said, to engraft on all the legal courses a law with German, a law with Spanish, a law with Portuguese. Brazil is very important. Now, the reason why I think you need it at that level too is that the other systems in the world are systems where people live, and they have found solutions to the problems, same problems that we have, different solutions, which we may want to adopt. And you wouldn't know about them until you study in that language, study that system. So you have law with German. You see how they deal with things like insurable interest and so in Germany. You see, so you have a comparison, you have an idea. Well, how do we deal with situations like a motor insurance bureau situation where the person who is the wrongdoer doesn't have insurance? How do we deal with that? How do they deal with it in Germany? And it's better to know, to approach the language at first hand, to approach the system at first hand with the language. Now, you guys are the young people of the students are young and they have time, so they can spend a year learning a language, and they will never regret it. And I think Peter could back me up on that. It's something that has to happen. The other thing I want to say is that part of the difficulty is our system here of language learning, and which is atrocious, that people spend 7 years doing French and Spanish, and they can't say a word in either French or Spanish. And I think that has got to stop too. And there has to be a system whereby more emphasis is placed on spoken language up to a certain point. Again, that is the whole question of the transformation of the educational system. And I think Dr. Carter is more learned in that area than I am.
If I can pick up on the personal aspect, I have a couple of added notes to give. I remember, as I said, my program at undergraduate university was the study abroad in English, and I chose to go to Holland as my country that I studied abroad in English. Now, Holland had a really huge international international exchange student program. There were persons from a number of different countries. And it's funny because you would think that English, being an English speaker, would make it easier to make friends. There were persons from, for example, lots of Americans, Australians, other fellow Brits. It was funny because, as a Caribbean person speaking English, I stood out. I wasn't a Brit, I wasn't an Australian, I wasn't an American. And I thought that being an English speaker would have me included in making those kind of friendships. But it's in fact the little bit of Dutch that I learned that had me build up a group of friends. Not to say that they were Dutch, but persons relied on the little bit of Dutch that I could speak to get around in the supermarket or to do this and that. So that's one added note I'd share. The other one is just by learning a language, you learn cultures, you learn the differences of persons, the different experiences. Language is a lot more than the words do. It's the tone, it's the way that persons relate to each other. And I can recall I had one friend who was on my exchange from my university in Warwick. She was Romanian. And now the Romanian language is a very harsh language. It sounds very argumentative. And we shared a flat with a couple of other persons, and every time she was on the phone calling home, she sounded like she was in a fight. Doesn't matter if she was talking to her mother, her beloved brother, her boyfriend, every single time she sounded like she was in a fight. And you'd wait for her to come down after this conversation, and she would be as happy as a lark. You'd be so surprised. And it's your appreciation that not every language is the same. You can't tell everything from just the words, and once you embrace languages, you learn about these things. You learn, how to better relate to persons. I'll quickly slip back into a mention of the law. As young attorneys, as many of you all might seek to go into practice in the profession, you have to remember that Trinidad is expanding its borders. There are lots of persons who are coming in from South America, Venezuela, Colombia, etc. And particularly I practice more criminal than I do civil. I do both, but I certainly practice more criminal. More and more, as the years go on, you will find yourself being in positions where you have to have a basic understanding of language. Language isn't just for the adults, it's for the children as well. And so especially, one thought that came to my mind is, if you're a child advocate, you need to speak to a child, it'd be a lot more comfortable for that person to talk to you without a translator. It'd be a lot more, you'd be a lot more accessible to them. That's one thing that I thought about that I thought I'd share.
Yes, Caribbean-wise, we had, as the opening activity in the open house, we had a panel discussion around the topic of Cuba. And in researching for the panel discussion, of course, needed to remind myself a bit more about Cuba. There are 11 million Cubans. Um, how do we engage with 11 million Spanish speakers in the largest Caribbean, island? And it's really a willingness. It should ideally start at school, because it simply makes sense. The longer you spend learning a language, the more proficient you become, usually. But it's not a reason to say, for example, I didn't do it at high school and therefore that's it. There are all kinds of skills that you acquire later in life. And the theory is, or the theory used to be, because it's a case of the theory used to be, we formerly thought that there was an optimal age at which you began language learning, and the optimal age was before puberty. Because the understanding was that after puberty, it's as though your brain didn't have the plasticity to learn a language. Now, with MRI and that kind of, the technology has shown us that in fact, it's far more dynamic than we thought. It's not that after puberty you can no longer learn a language. There are some things that are done better before puberty, but the brain continues developing, and there are other things. So the classic example for us in languages is Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, as you know, is German-born, statesman par excellence, good or bad, depending on your political ideology, but who speaks with a very pronounced German accent. No one would ever say that he doesn't command English. His English is very accented, but in terms of the richness, his understanding. And that's what we now know, the phonology of the language. It is better to begin speaking a language before puberty, because you are able to hear the sounds of the language and better able to produce them. So yes, in terms of your ability to speak the language, to pronounce the language, it's better if you do that before puberty. But in terms of, say, understanding the grammar of the language, there's no reason why you can't start that later. So it's our understanding of what promotes language learning and how best you learn a language. That understanding, for persons who are language teachers, language educators, that understanding makes us say it is never too late to learn a language. Don't feel that if you haven't begun the study of a language at age 6 or 8 or 10 or 12, it's all over. And I mean, at the Center for Language Learning, we see that we have a core of people who are learning Chinese, for example, a devoted core of Chinese students who put the rest of us to shame, because these are people who are learning Chinese as adults. Chinese, they are senior citizens. Mandarin is ranked, we have a ranking in terms of difficulty of learning languages. So for example, English, despite what we think, is a category 1 language, as are French and Spanish. Mandarin is a category 4. And I tell you, there are some senior citizens in the Mandarin classes who are devoted students who they might not retain as much as easily as the younger students, but it hasn't stopped their enjoyment, it hasn't stopped their devotion. And I really do want to emphasize that students should not think that they have missed the boat. And that's what a language center really, I'm putting a plug here for the CLL, a language center, a university language center serves that purpose. If you didn't have the opportunity to learn a language, if you didn't have the opportunity to learn a particular language, say at the secondary level, the Center for Language Learning fills that need for the university community and for the wider community, allowing you to pick up here at UE Mandarin, Japanese, Yoruba, a variety of languages. So to the students in law, to anyone else who might look at this podcast, I can't stress enough how much enjoyment there is in learning a language, how much we look forward to having you come to the CLL. It's really a hub of language activity on campus, language and culture, because we very much stress the cultural side of things. As you know, the people who have lived a language in some kind of way know it's not just the language, but it's also the language and culture. So we tend to stress it's language and culture. And the CLL is there for that. It's there to satisfy that need for people who need to learn another language. Gentlemen, it has been a pleasure speaking with you. Any final words?
If I can start off, I'll save the best for last. I have, as I said before, I have a number of friends. A lot of my close university friends speak a number of languages. In Trinidad and the Caribbean in general, we need not to miss the boat. We shouldn't be the CV that's passed in where you don't even mention your language skills because you've only got one. There are too many of my friends to mention who have at least four language proficiencies, and at a very high level. So I would stress, as Dr. Carter said, it's not too late to learn a language. It's not too late to even begin, even if you don't carry it to full working proficiency. It's not too late to begin. You don't know, especially as lawyers, how many doors can open just by being able to ask for a cup of coffee or where the closest bar is. So.
Yes, well, I would agree with Peter. You need to know where the closest rum shop is in the Caribbean. But yes, languages, I think, fundamental to any cultured person. I think that I would like to see the day when every student at UE has to have a language, and perhaps at different stages of proficiency. But I think languages are vital to the country. It's too small a country. You need to be able to converse with other people and understand them, and not simply take what their translators tell you that is happening, which is the present position. Like when we go to international conferences, Trinidad turns up with a delegation, they don't know what is happening, but they're depending on somebody else to tell them what is happening and why are they there. You see, I think we need to make tremendous advances in propagating languages as a necessary part of education. You cannot be an educated man and not have a language, in my view. And I feel that that may have to be imposed, or people may have to be pushed in that direction. I would rather that they be pushed in that direction very hard now, because the time is reaching where we have to understand our neighbors in Venezuela. We have to understand our neighbors in Martinique, in Guadeloupe, in Suriname, particularly as part of the Caribbean Court of Justice. In Brazil, tremendous pool of learning down there, and it's totally lost on the rest of the Caribbean. But going back to the Caribbean Court of Justice, again, it's true that English is the official language, but Suriname and Haiti are part of the system. Well, Haiti is not a member of the court, but it's a part of the system. And we have to have lawyers who have proficiency, local lawyers, not people who are waiting on somebody from England to come and translate. people from the Caribbean who know the Caribbean, who understand the Caribbean, and who are able to move seamlessly from one language to the other, from one culture to the other, and promote that what we're really trying to find in the Caribbean, regional integration and a new force in geopolitics. So that's what I would like to say, and I hope that the students will take up my, respond to my pleas that they must get a language.
Thank you.
Thank you.